My name is Tim Smith, and I'm the historian here at the Adams County Historical Society. And welcome to our weekly program. Okay, today, the program I'm going to present is a little bit about Jennie Wade. And you might know that I do a lot of lectures on Jennie Wade. And so I try to make them different every time. So if you see one advertised around town that I'm giving, like I do programs, you probably know, at the Farnsworth House in the winter, and I'll have a different topic relating to Jennie Wade. Today is kind of just an overview of some of my thoughts about the life and death of Jennie Wade. But I've done a program called Jack, Jennie, and Wesley, about the story of the three of them and the romance between Jack and Jennie and what we know about it. And I done a program called Who Shot JW, like, Who Shot JR, but about, what we know about her death and where the bullet may have come from. And I'll talk a little bit about these things in this program today. So if you do happen to go to a Jennie Wade program and you've already been to one of my programs, theoretically it'll be different each time. So the simple, of course, story is that on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, about 8:30 in the morning, a bullet came up Baltimore Street out of the town, went through two doors of a house and hit Jennie in the back, below the shoulder blade. The bullet passed through her heart. She was killed instantly. And Jennie Wade was the only civilian to be killed during the fighting at Gettysburg. Now, I always like to present the fact that there were like 30 civilian casualties, because a lot of times people present the fact that there were 50,000 casualties of the battle, but only one civilian was killed. And of course, they're playing with apples and oranges. If you use the 50,000 for soldiers, you must use casualties. You must use 30 for civilian casualties, because there's like 30 killed or wounded or captured. But if you're talking about fatalities, for Jennie Wade only being one, you should talk about 5,000 soldiers killed in the battle, and not count the ones who died later or the ones who were wounded or casualties. So I always think it's unfair that people present it as such. But so to just make the, to make it clear, she's the only civilian to be killed during the fighting. Other civilians died as a direct result of the battle afterwards. And, I do a whole program on the 30 civilian casualties that you can look up online or, come and see at some point. But so it is kind of remarkable. And we know a lot about the details of Jennie's death and how Jennie was killed. And I took this from the 1872 Atlas of Adams County. In the back, there's original copies. There's this really nice colorized image of the town. And of course, I added details to it, like I added the brickyard, Samuel McCreary's brickyard, and I added the names of the people who lived in the houses that were not marked on the map, just to give you an idea of where we're talking about. And the McClellan house, John Lewis McClellan was married to Georgia Wade McClellan. They had married in 1862, and they moved into this house, and that's Jennie's sister. And so that's where Jennie was killed. Today we refer to it as the Jennie Wade house, but really it was a duplex. Two families lived there, the McLean family and the McClellan family, and it was not even, they were renters. So it was owned by a guy named John Houck. But of course, we don't call it the Houck house or the McClellan house. We call it the Jennie Wade house, because Jennie Wade was killed there. And you can get a good idea of the buildings at the edge of the town. Miss Elizabeth Sweeney, in 1872, that's Harvey Sweeney's house, and of course that's the Farnsworth house. And John Weinbrenner, that's Mr. G's old-fashioned homemade ice cream, which of course Mr. G doesn't own anymore, someone else does. Samuel McCreary's house, that's where the entrance to the junior high school is, and that's a big open area now where all the ghost tours stand, when you ride through town. The tannery complex owned by John Rupp Rupp's residence and tannery, and then Solomon Welty's house. And, on Steinway Avenue, there were two, or there could have been a third house there, I think. It's just not shown on the 72 map. But Belinda Frazier lives there. She's a woman who moved here from Virginia prior to the war, a former slave. And then we have the Tawney house, Perry Tawney, which appear on some early photographs. And then, of course, the Battlefield Hotel in the intersection there of Baltimore and Steinway Avenue. And I show on here the McClellan House, the Snyder House, Conrad Snyder, who had actually owned the Battlefield Hotel and then died in 1861, I believe. He also had owned the Dobbin House, and when he died, that got sold to the Pierce family. So Tilly Pierce's father owned that at the time of the battle, but I just labeled it as Dobbin. And then Ogden, we have an account from that family that lived there, and Philby. And I should mention that Samuel Philby is Jennie Wade's grandfather. And Jennie Wade's brother, Sam, lived apparently with the Philby family, is listed with them in the census records. So Samuel Philby is, he appears in early records, and we won't talk about their genealogy today, though. But it's interesting to know that they're at Jennie Wade's funeral on July 4th, and they just live a short distance away. So we're fortunate when we talk about this subject that we have this just remarkable photograph that was recorded in November 1863 along Baltimore Street. And this was recorded by the Tyson brothers of Gettysburg. Hope my phone doesn't go off while we're having our program. Okay, I turned it down. So the object was the Tyson brothers set up their camera in front of the Jennie Wade house. You might notice that when you go out there and stand there today, that the Inns of 63, the former Holiday Inn, is sort of in a little dip, little hole, and there's a little hill that goes up, and the Jennie Wade house sits on top of a little hill. And it was like that at the time of the battle. They didn't dig that out. So you can see that the Tyson brothers set their camera up directly in front of the Jennie Wade house. And you can see they're on a little hill overlooking a fence that leads into the town. And this would be the area where the Inns of 63 is located. And this photograph is looking at the buildings at the edge of the town, and it's just remarkable. They took 3 photographs that day. They were trying to capture the procession, Abraham Lincoln, and the different state delegations marching to the Soldiers' National Cemetery. And that procession came down Baltimore Street and then went out the Emmitsburg Road or Steinway Avenue. So it turned right there. And they recorded 3 images of it. And, of course, this is the one probably taken for practice to get the, timing down so that, they could figure out how many seconds to, expose the negative. But this one, the Adams County Historical Society here is fortunate enough that in the 1930s, Charles Tyson Tipton, William Tipton's son, who worked for them at the time, made this print off of the original negative, and we have this print. So it's just remarkable. There's a second one with soldiers in the streets marching. And then the third one, it supposedly shows Abraham Lincoln. And those negatives do not exist. So, and in this one, if you blow up this area of where we think the bullet probably came from, you see part of Rupp's tannery. I should point out in this one, that's John Rupp's house. There's the Rupp tannery that we showed with the tannery office. There's the Farnsworth house. There's the William Homan house farther up the street, the Benner house, the Garlick house, the Shriver house, and the Pierce house. And along this side, we have Solomon Welty, John Weinbrenner. We have that famous tree in the photograph that's still there. And then the third one, let's see, I made a mistake here. It's Solomon Welty, Samuel McCreary, and John Weinbrenner. You can see there. And you can see that there are 4 houses probably built near the same time that exactly are exactly the same. And parts of them still stand. The McCreary house was torn down. But the Solomon Welty, the back part of it is still there, and there's a front section on it. And Weinbrenner's look exactly like this. And this one has been torn down or greatly altered. We argue about that. But here in this view, you can see blow up of it. Here is the office of the Rupp's tannery. And I'm going to talk about it, but the earliest known reference to where the bullet came from is the office of the tannery. So supposedly the bullet came from there and then went, up the street. And of course, the Farnsworth house and the building of the tannery between there. But there's the Homan house, the Benner house, the Garlick house. Then that's the window of the Shriver house that, the Adams County Historical Society owns. We would like for the bullet to have come from that window. But I don't know if I can say that. And then the Tilly Pierce house with Tilly Pierce's back porch. Now, let's see. Elwood Christ, who was a historian here at the Adams County Historical Society that passed away many years ago, he was hired at some point to do a history of the Pierce house when it was purchased by Craig Hafner, who ran Greystone's American History Store, if you remember that. And he made this remarkable drawing based on his perception of what was being shown in that early photograph. So you can see in the drawing, you can see it a little bit better here. The Farnsworth house with our attic window, the office of the tannery building here, and with that window, that again is the place in which the earliest known account of where the bullet came from, it was said came from there. And then, of course, we have the Homan house and the Jacob Benner property. See, it doesn't really list it. There's Homan Shoe Shop. And then we have the Shriver house. And Woody believes that in this photograph, in great detail, if you look, you can see the bowling alley in the back with a door to the bowling alley in that view. Okay? And then we have the Pierce house and the back part of the Pierce house right there with the porch that undoubtedly, one of the reasons I'm showing you these buildings is all of them are filled with sharpshooters. There's not just, I think there's been a tendency to suggest that the bullet that killed Jennie Wade was a stray bullet fired by one sharpshooter that was firing against another sharpshooter. And I tend to believe that Jennie was killed in the early morning of the third day in what was a massive sharpshooter battle that erupted between elements of Eugene Blackford's Alabama sharpshooters, Louisiana Tigers, and different units of the Northern Army. They're positional Cemetery Hill. So hundreds of men are firing at hundreds of men. And one of those bullets went through the door and killed Jennie Wade. So I don't like the characterization of it was a stray shot by one sharpshooter. Or, as someone made up years ago, a sharpshooter who was aiming for the doorknob on Jennie Wade's house to try to get practice or something. It's not like that at all. Jennie's killed in the middle of a battle, not a stray bullet. And so also I would just want to point out, you see the Heck Kitzmiller house over there? And that comes out, there's a place on the front street, a house on the front of that now. And that's basically Mark Nesbitt's ghost tours. And I don't know if anybody noticed, there's a room in the back of this house now underneath, and they sell moonshine. Has anybody else tried the moonshine? I went and tried it. Okay. But they had a General Reynolds moonshine that I particularly liked. I think it was like a root beer moonshine. Okay. So I'm not supposed to recommend specific businesses on our tour, but there you go. And the McCullough house shown up here, just since he has it, they suggested it also to sharpshooters in that window. And we have an account of it. That is a little gray house next to Mark Nesbitt's. It was a bed and breakfast at one time called the Quiet Night Bed and Breakfast, if you know where that is. So I also like to point out to people that the house I live in, which is right here, was not there at the time. And all the houses here were not there at the time along Baltimore Street. And there was a 1.5-story building associated with the tannery complex. And there was a roof line there. And so all the bullets coming from the northern line of battle being fired at the sharpshooters that fly over that roof are smacking into the Farnsworth house. And so that explains why the side of the Farnsworth house is just perforated with bullets. But if you go there and you look closely, you'll notice there's very few bullets below this red line, that they're all hitting the wall there. They're not aiming for a sharpshooter in that window and miss. They're probably aiming for a line of sharpshooters that are laying on the back side of this roof. So there's sharpshooters in the buildings, in the windows. There's sharpshooters behind the fences. There's sharpshooters behind the trees. There are Confederate sharpshooters all over the edge of the town. And that is verified by the various accounts that we have. So I just for food for thought, that, that's why the bullet holes, especially right along here, are just so intense on the side of the Farnsworth house. Also, the Farnsworth house has 3 windows in the back of it. You can barely see one there. And that's probably where the bed is located, in that back room that we have downstairs that has 3 bullet holes in it. So here's another view of the Rupp house, the Rupp residence, John Rupp. And he's the guy who owns a tannery. See the tannery smokestack? The tannery smokestack, and I'd love to dig it up and see if I can find the remnants of it. It must go pretty deep into the ground, the area where the smokestack was. I say it's in the parking lot of Cone Sweet Cone. Is that what it's called? Cone Sweet Cone, the ice cream shop there. So it's in the back part near the alley. Now, you probably know we have a letter from John Rupp written on July 19th, 1863. And the letter is to his sister-in-law in Baltimore. And in the 1960s, a family from Baltimore, brought the letter to the Adams County Historical Society and donated it to us. So this is a letter written after the battle, and among the things he talks about in this letter is the violent sharpshooter action. And I don't remember where it is in the letter. Let me see, did I put it on here? I don't think I did, no. But he talks about Jennie Wade. He says Virginia Wade was killed in a house that Catherine Frybaker used to live in. And of course, Catherine Frybaker married a guy named Isaac McLean, and they live in that house at the time of the battle alongside Jennie Wade's sister. So, and he also mentions in this letter, written 2 weeks after the battle, he mentions that Jennie Wade was baking bread for the soldiers. We have early accounts to suggest that Jennie Wade was baking the bread, something that is later denied by a lot of people. Oh, she wasn't baking bread for the soldiers. But there you go, John Rupp's letter. Good source. And of course, he's writing it to his sister-in-law. He's not like writing it to the newspaper or anything. So here, I know people love this. So Andrew and I colorized the best version we had of this photograph with the soldiers in the streets of these buildings. And, the colorization process is not perfect. It tends to make things purple, but it gives us a separation of the colors. And so, we know the Homan house is a frame house painted whitewashed. And we know the Farnsworth house is a red brick house. So it gives you an idea of, the office of the tannery and where the office is. And that it gives you a better separation of where this factory building is with the tannery opposed to it. Well, look at that American flag. See, they had two poles with the, how they attach the poles, and you got a large American flag there. And again, this is all for the procession. You can see the windows in the back portion of the Farnsworth house. It was a 1.5 story structure in the back, which no longer exists. But you can see that probably, the bed we have downstairs, it's unlikely it was in one of the front rooms because the bullets seem to go straight through and not from an angle. But it's just a great, and then of course, look up there, there's the Shriver house window. There's no house between the Garlick house and the Shriver house at that time. It's open. So that was a very prominent window, and we know from the account of Tilly Pierce and others that there were sharpshooters in that house during the battle. So, we have documentation of sharpshooters being in several of the buildings at the edge of the town. And the reason I'm focusing on that side of the street is that's where we believe the bullet came from. Now, in 1917, John White Johnston, and I'll talk about him at the end, wrote a book, The True Story of Jennie Wade. And in his book, he identified the bullet that killed Jennie Wade as coming from the office of the Rupp Tannery. And this is interesting, again, because it's one of the first mentions we have of exactly where the bullet came from. And let me point this fact out to you. Prior to the Holiday Inn being built in, I believe, 1964, anyone could go to the Jennie Wade house and look through the bullet holes and see the path of where those two holes led to. Since the Holiday Inn has been built, I think everybody's like, well, we don't know exactly where it came from because the building's in a way and you really can't tell. But people could look through the bullet holes before the Holiday Inn was built. And so I think everyone had a general idea of where the bullet came from, and they talked about where the bullet came from, early on. This is an 1869 image of the Jennie Wade house. It comes from Harper's Weekly. It was in a series of images that were related to the dedication, I believe, of the Soldiers' National Monument in 1869. And I kind of like it. It's colorized, and, they would occasionally colorize these images for the newspaper. And early on, I should say, when the Farnsworth house was being established, Loring Schultz purchased the Farnsworth house in 1972. And there was a tour guide at that time named Eugene Sickles. He was a sign painter. He did displays for many of the museums around the town. So like the Charlie Weaver Museum, inside all those wonderful illustrations on the wall, he did a diorama of the town that you can still see in the back of the Union Drummer Boy. It was originally, it was around town at several places, but for a time it was at Charlie Weaver's Museum. And Eugene Sickles became friends with Loring Schultz. And of course, Loring's still alive. He's in his 90s. And he determined that the bullet that killed Jennie Wade had to have come from the window at the Farnsworth house. Now, I'm more than happy to give him credit for this because, to me, it's very confusing, and I wouldn't want to say it came from one location or another location, but it made sense. And he did all kinds of really interesting things. You can see he measured. Because, I've heard ghost tours, and, I like to make fun of the ghost tours, so I'll continue to do so. I've heard ghost tours in front of the house, and one guy goes in great detail about Enfield rifles and how they didn't have the range to fire that far. It's just ridiculous. I don't know what he's talking about. And he measured it. It's 612 feet from the window of the Farnsworth house to the door of the Jennie Wade house. That's only like 200 yards. And 350 yards is effective range with these Civil War muskets. So undoubtedly, the Farnsworth house is a good candidate for the flight of the bullet. And I think that's interesting. Now, I don't know when he created this map. I'm not sure if he was really into the path of the bullet prior to Loring Schultz buying the Farnsworth house in 1972. But this stuff comes from this image comes from the Walt Lane collection here. Eugene Sickles had Walt Lane make a photo out of his drawing, and I'm imagining they were doing it for Loring when he was opening up a museum. So originally, the Farnsworth House is not a restaurant. It's the Farnsworth House Museum. How about that? An early museum dedicated to the civilian story of Gettysburg. So, and look, he says on his brochure, this is a brochure. Oh, and Mary, when did we get this brochure in our collection? Yesterday. Wasn't it yesterday morning? Okay, 2 days ago, I'm wrong. 2 days ago. And I put it in a slideshow already. I had never seen it. He told me about it, but I had never seen a brochure. So it says on it, Jennie Wade, the battle-scarred Civil War house from which Jennie Wade was shot. And Eugene Sickles, like I said, was all about this. Now, Eugene Sickles is dead. I do have a paper he wrote on it. But again, I'm more than happy to give him the credit for figuring out that it came from there. So, and here's some other stuff that he drew. I'm telling you, this guy was really into this. So, what do you think of the top drawing? Isn't it great? I don't know what the Vance house is. I'd imagine Vance house, no one named Vance lived there. I can tell you that. But he must be seeing the office of the tannery complex, and he's drawing that on there. And I don't know who told him that somebody named Vance lived there. Again, no one named Vance lived in our town ever. So I don't know what he's talking about. I like how he has the bridge. Do you ever think there must be a bridge there on Baltimore Street where the stream runs under it? You can see it there. And then here's the Farnsworth House window up in the attic today. And, they take tours up in the attic, and you can, the Farnsworth House has house tours on Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays. I think they're like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and you can walk through the house, and they take you to the attic. But you can see the flight of the bullet here that he's drawing. And you can see the house sits on top of a little hill. So all this is endlessly fascinating to me. So, in the door. And of course, this is where the bullet holes is in the door. And I got to tell you, this image is from the 1917 book by John White Johnston. One of the more popular stories told around town, and I emphasize stories, is that, that's not the original door of the Jennie Wade house. That door was sold long ago, and then they recreated the door and put it back on. Well, if that's true, then they did it exactly with the exact holes and the exact dents in the door, and I deny that they would have the ability to do that. I think the door on the Jennie Wade house is the same door. that has been there for years. Of course, the hole was increased because women keep putting their fingers in it because they're trying to get married. I won't go into any more detail if you don't know that story. Yeah, they've been doing that since the 1940s. I found an article from the 1940s that a lady came to town and was told to do that, and then she got engaged a couple months later. Mary, did you put your finger in the door and then get engaged right afterwards? Okay. See, it works. So I think the story is you'll be engaged within a year. Okay? So you want to go out and do that. So anyway, my point is the door is the same door. So, and I've always, known that. Oh, also, I should tell you this, that in the 1990s, there was a walking tour of the town done out of the Rupp House by the Gettysburg Foundation, and they had gotten a hold of the story that the Jennie Wade house was moved, that the Jennie Wade house wasn't in the same place that it is now, that it used to sit at the bottom of the hill. But when the Holiday Inn was being built, the owners of the Holiday Inn wanted it moved for the space of the Holiday Inn, so they moved it up the hill, and then they built the Holiday Inn. And it's preposterous. I mean, there are maps of the town that show the Jennie Wade house at the exact spot it is today, and it has a basement. I'd always be like, it has a basement. What did they dig a new hole? Did they take all the stones out of the hole? Did they set the Jennie Wade house off to the side, put all the stones back in the hole, and then put it on top? I mean, what are you talking about? So anyway, I'd say that because you'll still hear people say the Jennie Wade house was moved. So knowing it's not moved and knowing that the bullet hole on the outside is the same and there's an inside door, some people say a bullet could not possibly have traveled through two doors. But I'd like to point out that on the outside or the inside door here, the bullet passed through a groove cut into the panel on both sides, and that place where the bullet passed through is razor thin as opposed to the rest of the solid door. And simply, you can line up the two doors, and of course you're looking at the Holiday Inn. So I'll never forget, I got a phone call one day, and I was approached by this author who was writing a book. And I believe this book is just about completed. It's just coming out here. I think it's being done by Savis Beatty. And the book is about famous deaths of the Civil War. He has a chapter about Stonewall Jackson and what we know about his death, and Sedgwick at Spotsylvania and what we know about his death. And he has a chapter on the death of Jennie Wade. And I helped him a little bit, with factual stuff. But he went to the University of West Virginia, and I don't know if you're aware, they have a forensic department where they teach people who are entering the field of police forensics. And so he got the guy in charge of that to come to Gettysburg, and I got permission from the owners of the Jennie Wade house and the tour center that I know real well, and we got a day where they allowed us to do a forensic study with professionals. There's been a lot of Johnny-come-lately things done in our town, with people and, bottles of luminol to blood stains and stuff. I don't buy any of that stuff. I guess I'm pretty harsh. But this is a professional, and he came and did a whole study of the Jennie Wade house. And he shot a laser beam. And, of course, there's some play because we're not sure how exactly open the door was. So, the outside door is shut, so that's a certainty. And then this door, of course, was opened, and supposedly the door between the kitchen and the parlor was open to give Jennie some better protection. And then Jennie is standing at a dough tray behind the door. But he shot a laser through the two doors. And guess of course, he was able to remove in his computer the Holiday Inn. So guess where the bullet went to? Guess what he determined? The bullet came from the area of the Rupp Tannery office, or maybe just above it on the roof, like at the Farnsworth house. So it could have come from the Farnsworth house, depending on, and I think he also determined the bullet was still rising, because some people who wanted to be farther away, the bullet would have to drop at some point through the two doors. So the bullet's still rising, and it's coming from the place we always said the bullet came from. And again, that's probably because people looked through the two holes and saw where it came from. That's my take on it. Okay, enough about that. So there's another big story that we talk about when we talk about the death of Jennie Wade, and that's her relationship to Jack Skelly and Wesley Culp. So Jennie's born in Gettysburg. She's 20 years old at the time of the battle, and she had a boyfriend in the Union Army, Johnston H. Skelly. How much we actually know about their relationship, it's evolved a little bit over the years, because the Skelly family a few years ago actually released letters from Jennie to Jack. I shouldn't say always, but since the 1950s, when people started doing research at the National Archives, we've had access to Jack Skelly's pension record, and in there are letters between Jack and his mother in which he mentions his relationship to Jennie Wade. So, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, Jack Skelly enters service in the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry early in April 1861. And then after that 90-day unit is released from service, then he rejoins Company F, 87th Pennsylvania. And he serves in that unit until he's killed. And in June of 1863, his unit is stationed at Winchester, Virginia. And at Winchester, on June 14th, Richard Ewell's forces appear outside of the town. And on the morning, I guess they appear on the 13th. There's some skirmishing where the Winchester Cemetery now is. Sometimes they call it the Stonewall Cemetery, where the Confederates are buried. And the 87th Pennsylvania is skirmishing on the 14th from the edge of town near that cemetery with the Southern forces that are advancing. The commander of the forces at Winchester, Robert Milroy, decides to evacuate Winchester. And on the early morning hours of June 15th, as that force is retreating up the Martinsburg Turnpike, which, of course, I think is now Route 11, if you go down there. It's the old road, not the new road. 81 actually parallels this old Route 11. At a place called Stevenson's Depot, they encounter Edward Johnson's division. Basically, Richard Ewell had anticipated that the garrison might try to pull out of their fortifications at Winchester. So he sent Edward Johnson's division east and north to cut off the Martinsburg Turnpike at Stevenson's Depot. And Johnson's division arrives, and Milroy's forces retreating, and so his division attacks Milroy. And it's a horrible disaster for the Northerners. And the 87th Pennsylvania is thrown into line of battle and engages the Southern Army. And one of the units that arrives there in the fight is the Stonewall Brigade, part of Johnson's division. And of course, in the 2nd Virginia of the Stonewall Brigade is Wesley Culp. And interestingly enough, Wesley Culp's brother, William Culp, is also in the 87th Pennsylvania. Wesley had left Gettysburg prior to the war, ended up moving to Shepherdstown, and at the outbreak of the war, he had belonged to this local militia unit before the war, joined the Southern Army, and eventually became part of Company B, I believe it is, 2nd Virginia. And this, at the same time, his brother is joining the Union Army and ends up, he was in the 2nd Pennsylvania also, ends up in the 87th Pennsylvania. So at the Battle of Stevenson's Depot, the Stonewall Brigade goes on the line, and hey, I've studied this battle. I don't know how many people have studied this battle. Oh, I should say, for street cred, I wrote the wayside exhibit at Stevenson's Depot that you read if you go there. So I interpreted the battle. And these two units met face to face. I mean, how many times does that happen? You'll be like, oh yeah, this guy was at that battle and his brother was also at that battle. No, the two units met face to face and fired into each other. The two brothers, William and Wesley. So the battle's over. The Union forces retreated. There are dead and wounded Northern soldiers all across this battlefield. And Wesley comes walking over and somebody yells at him. And it's a guy named William Holdsworth, who later becomes one of our more prominent battlefield guides. And he says, hey, Wesley, your friend Jack is over here. He had known Jack from early childhood. Jack Skelly's father was a tailor. Wesley Culp's father was a tailor. Jennie Wade's father was a tailor. And early on, Daniel Skelly writes that Jack Skelly's father worked with Johnson's father. So his first job apparently was with Skelly and Culp's fathers worked together at the same shop. So they know each other from early childhood. And so Wesley goes over, and there's Jack Skelly lying there wounded. And we have several good accounts of this. And the account basically says that Wesley helped Jack get to a hospital site. Now, Winchester is like 4 miles south of this. Some accounts have Wesley going to Winchester with Jack Skelly. And I just can't buy that because, you know, Johnson's division is going to move on and march and cross the Potomac and, of course, be in the Gettysburg campaign. And the story is that Jack, at some point, gives Wesley a message to give to his mom, Jack's mom. And that message must be something like, you know, I'm wounded, tell her, I'll be all right, something like that. He doesn't know he's dying. He's wounded in the arm. And you might know, Jack Skelly dies on, I believe, July 12th or 13th. I think he dies in the middle of the night. So it's a debatable when exactly he dies. In a hospital in Winchester. He doesn't know he's dying. You know, he's taken to the hospital. He's treated, and, infection sets in and he eventually dies. So he dies a couple weeks after the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, this is where the story gets twisted. We do have a nice account with an interview of Wesley Culp's sister, that Wesley visited her house on Middle Street on the evening of July 1st and told them that he had a message for Jack's mom. But nowhere is Jennie Wade's name mentioned in this interview. In the 1940s, Anna Culp Myers, and I'm going to really confuse you here. Do you remember that Wesley Culp's sister married Sally Myers' brother? Okay, forget that now that I said that. So that'll really mess with you. So Wesley Culp visits his sisters who are living together on West Middle Street. And in the 1940s, Anna Culp Myers' son and daughter, who are not alive at the time of the battle, start telling people that Wesley Culp said he had a message for Jennie Wade. That Jack was dying, and if he survived, then he would come back and marry Jennie. The story about Wesley Culp having a message for Jennie Wade is probably the only part of this program that I just say, hey, that's just not true. It's just something that was started, and now people incorporate it in all their stories. You can still do it if you like. If you're telling the story and you want to do it, that's fine. But you just should know that that is not well grounded in the factual information we have about the story from early sources. And there's an interview with Nicole Myers, and she doesn't say anything about a message for Jennie. So, and now eventually, of course, Jennie's killed on the third day of the battle. Wesley Culp is killed in the fighting on Culp's Hill, probably on July 2nd. But again, his body is never recovered, that whole story. We're not going to get into that. But as I said, there are letters between Jack and Jennie. Another story that is popularized after the Civil War is that Jack and Jennie were secretly engaged. There's no evidence in the letters from Jack to his mother or from Jennie to Jack that they're engaged. As a matter of fact, it doesn't seem like they're engaged. Maybe Jennie wants to be engaged. She wants Jack to propose, but it doesn't seem like they are. But even so, this story does come out early on in the story, and this is a fabric of the early part of the story that they're engaged. Now, again, they're secretly engaged, and Jack and Jennie are both dead. So how do we know they're secretly engaged if it was a secret? There's a specific interview in 1922 where the Gettysburg newspaper interviews Georgia Wade McClellan, her sister. And they asked Jennie's sister if they were engaged, and she said she didn't know they were engaged. That's something new to her. So if her sister doesn't know she's secretly engaged, how do we know they're secretly engaged? He must have told somebody. But again, it's a secret. Okay, so here's what fascinates me. And you'll hear people talk about this. That Jennie Wade's name is not Jennie Wade. Her name is Mary Virginia Wade. And here is one of the letters to Jack Skelly. And if you want to see these original letters, they're owned by Eric Dorr, and they're at the Gettysburg Museum of History. He purchased them from the Skelly family. So they're on Baltimore Street, and you can go see them. And in one of the letters, she signs it Virginia Wade, just like you'd expect. Mary Virginia Wade. That's kind of interesting. Do you know that James Wade, the father, is born in Virginia? He's born in Jamestown, when Jamestown was a city there. And then, actually, you know what, I might be wrong because he called Jamestown City County. So maybe he's born around Jamestown. But James Wade has a daughter named Georgia and a daughter named Virginia. And people over the years have used this as proof that he's a traitor, a Southern sympathizer. I'm sure he's not thinking about that in the 1840s when he named him. Okay. Now, here is another letter. Boy, I should have done a little better job here. I probably was making a copy of the whole letter and I zoomed in on this. Jennie Wade. So her Jennie, of course, Jennie is short for Virginia. And here's a letter that she signs at Jennie Wade. So people have said over the years, oh, well, her name really wasn't Jennie. And one article actually says that it was a mistake made early on by a newspaper reporter, and they just decided to go with it after that. So here's Jennie. But there's a troubling thing. There is a letter that she signs, Jennie. My take on it would be that Jennie pronounces her name, whatever her name is, Jennie. Jennie. Can you tell if that's a J or a G? And I think Oh, and then here's something else. In the 1863 letters written from Jack Skelly to his mother, he always spells it with a J. Jennie. And people have suggested, well, that's because Jack is actually talking about another girl in town named Jennie and not Jennie Wade. That starts getting really out there, right? So here's my take on it. I think Jack calls her Jennie. Maybe he's dating her and doesn't even realize that her name's Jennie because of the way she pronounces it or the way other people pronounce it. And then eventually, if you look at the series of letters, Jennie starts signing her name Jennie to Jack. Is that wild or what? Okay, so this is way too much information about this tiny little topic, but I want you to be armed next time somebody tries to correct you and say her name was really Jennie. Yeah, it's much more complicated. I got to tell you that when you read the letters, let me tell you this story. There is no evidence, direct evidence, that Jennie Wade is a slut or a whore or a prostitute with a brothel. Hey, but all these things are told nightly on our ghost tours. Yes. Stop and listen to them talk about Jennie Wade. Now, maybe the ones at the Jennie Wade House Museum don't do this because, they're at the Jennie Wade House and they want you to come to the Jennie Wade House. But the other tour guides in town just blast Jennie Wade like any chance they get. And I think, to me, when I hear them doing it, it's almost as if they're trying to establish some camaraderie with their patrons. Like, hey, I'm going to tell you a story that the town doesn't want anybody to know. Jennie Wade wasn't such the good girl that she claims to be. And I'm telling you, one of the tours says she was a prostitute running a brothel. But the town historians, of course me, they don't want to talk about this. They make her sound like a good girl. There's no evidence at all that Jennie Wade is sleeping around on Jack Skelly. The worst things we have are like a note in one of the letters from Jack to his mom that Jack's mom is telling Jack that Jennie is keeping comp late, meaning she had company at her house at a late hour. And then of course, there's a guy that I found a letter from in the 10th New York Cavalry who said that when he was in town in the winter of 1861, 1862, every guy in the 10th New York dated one of the girls in town, and he dated Jennie Wade. But there's nothing that proves that she was sleeping around on him. So, and I think that this stems out of the desire of people not to declare a woman in town a hero. And there's a pushback after the battle about Jennie Wade's popularity. And maybe I'll talk about that later here in a minute. But in one of the Jennie Wade letters, I should say there's a line in another of the letters where Jennie says, Jack, it's February 22nd. Does that mean anything to you? To me, it means a lot more than George Washington's birthday. So in that sentence, the way it reads, it appears as if, that's when Jennie and Jack first hooked up. But, in our world, what does that exactly mean? She's just talking about that's when they first kissed, whatever. So anyway, my point is, I guess, with this, whatever you're saying about Jennie Wade and Jack and their relationship, we're drawing into this because the evidence is not, exactly there. But here, there's this note, and we have 6 or 8 letters, I think from Jennie to Jack from the Skelly family. And apparently the letters were held by Daniel Skelly, Jack Skelly's little brother. And this one is cut in half. And he says that in this letter that letters destroyed, just boy and girl chatter of no interest to prying and critical eyes. So he cut the letters up that had portions in it where Jennie was saying something to Jack about their relationship. So again, all this non-existing evidence really piles up. And at the end, you can see it says DAS at the very end. That's Daniel Alexander Skelly. So Jack Skelly's brother is cutting letters up. So I'm showing all this because I'm trying to show you the worst things we have that suggest that, Jennie is not an upstanding, nice, innocent, church-going girl. But to me, none of this really matters anyway in the bigger scheme of things. So, but there it is. Do I have anything else to say about that? So, as I mentioned, I wanted to put it here to mention that the Gettysburg Museum of History, Eric Dorr, has these letters and that original note I just showed you. And here is the Jennie Wade figure that he has on display at his museum. He got it from the Wax Museum. So if you want to see his Jennie Wade figure from the original Wax Museum, you can check it out. And also, behind it, there's that Charlie Weaver Museum sign. Did you see that 2 days ago we put the Charlie Weaver lecture on YouTube that Glenn Corbett did here a few weeks ago? It was really good if you're into Charlie Weaver. And, of course, I remember the Jennie Wade wax figure at the Jennie Wade at the Wax Museum. Do you know originally they only had curtains behind all the wax figures, and then later they put the scenery behind them? But there she is, kneading her dough. Now, just some photographs associated with the Jennie Wade story. First of all, we are very fortunate that apparently in 1861 or 1862, Jennie Wade, her sister, this is Georgia Wade McCollin, and a friend of theirs, Mrs. Comfort, went to the studio on West Middle Streets operated by a guy named Spates, and he had this ambrotype made. And after Jennie Wade died, I'm assuming her sister took this up to the Tyson Brothers studio. And the Tyson Brothers studio took that image with an enlarger, and they would often do this for people who had ambrotypes or daguerreotypes and wanted them made into CDVs to be mass produced. Usually after someone had died, they had an enlarger, and they enlarged just the face out of that image. And I got to tell you, that is the only known image of Mary Virginia Wade. That original was actually donated to the Gettysburg Foundation or the Gettysburg National Military Park. I'm not sure which one, but it's on display now at the Gettysburg National Military Park in their special temporary display. So if you want to go see that, you can go in there. I think you can even go in that maybe you can go into that area without going into the museum. Maybe not. Maybe you had to pay. But it's on display there today, and you can see it. And it was donated by Jennie Wade's sister's descendants, which is very cool. So Tyson made an image of Jennie Wade, just a little bit of her head and a little bit of her dress, and he was selling CDVs. And these are being sold early on, at least by 1864. Possibly, I don't know from the back mark, possibly he's selling these in the crowd at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. We know he's selling images of John Burns there. But look at that. This is an original from one of my friends. And I have another one. A guy in New York has another one of these. So this is the image that created by the Tyson brothers, and then reproduced by William Tipton that we know of Jennie Wade. When the Episcopal Church is built on Baltimore Street, the one with the large stone tower, the cornerstone was laid in 1888, and then they started raising money for the church. And they sold images of Jennie Wade to raise money for the church. And on the back of them, and so we're talking about something that's like from 1888. There's a story about the death of Jennie Wade. And again, I'm not sure exactly when this is first told, but there you go. Corporal Skelly of Gettysburg, who was engaged to Miss Wade, was wounded and taken prisoner at Carter Woods near Winchester, and June 15th, and died on July 12th at age 22. So here, they're saying that he's engaged to Miss Wade. And so that story is at least being told in the late 1870s, I believe, into the 1880s, but not the story about the message for Jennie to Jack. But this story is being told early on that they're engaged. And then here is a William Tipton stereo card. And I'm not sure of the date, but on the back of this, it's definitely 1880s. On the back of it, it has a story. And it tells, the story of her being killed. And he says that it's a, well-known story. It is not so well known that she was engaged to and corresponded with Corporal Skelly, for whom Gettysburg GAR post number 9 is named. So again, as evidence that story is told early on. I mention these things because there have been books written on Jennie Wade and articles, and people often say that, there's no evidence that they were engaged. Well, whether there's evidence or not, that is a story that has been told for a long, long time. And in 1917, when John Wade Johnston wrote his book, The True Story of Jennie Wade, John Wade Johnston had this image in his book. And he actually corresponded and interviewed Georgia Wade McClellan. And again, that is what the image that we see that starts being sold around town in 1864 comes from. And this is the front cover of the book. And then, of course, this is, Andrew, our director, is very proud of his doctored and colorized image of Jennie Wade. What do you think? Yeah. So, it's AI. So, I'd like to point out that I have probably met more Jennie Wade reenactors than anyone else here, I'm sure, where people impersonate Jennie Wade. I remember at the opening of the Gettysburg Outlet Mall. Anybody else go to the opening day of the Gettysburg Outlet Mall? Come on, nobody else? Chubby Checker was there. He did the entertainment. He did the twist. And he had a product he was selling at a table there, the Chubicizer or something like that, where he did the twist on it. Okay. It was to help lose weight. She was there. A Jennie Wade reenactor was there. And every one of them does their hair in that little thing on the back. I don't think that's her hair. That's a piece that she's wearing on top. Now, maybe her hair is wrapped around it somehow, but her hair, it's some kind of hair piece, not her actual hair that you see there. And you can see colorizing it that different colored jewels pop up. So in 1867, this stereo card was produced by the Tyson brothers of Gettysburg and is sold around town. The house which Jennie Wade was killed during the battle. And here's a good close-up of it, and you can see, it's, again, you don't see the drop-off or the hill, but it's on a little hillock. And here is Peter and Hanson Weaver's 1867 stereo card of the Jennie Wade house. So you get an idea what it looks like in 1867. And here's the 1869 drawing of the house from Harper's Weekly. And here is an 1870s William Tipton view of the house. And again, it's still a duplex. Do you see how there's a fence going across there? In, I think, 1867, Anna Garlack and her husband Jacob purchased half of the house. And then here is about a 1900 view. In the early maps, there's an alley that goes up right beside the house. And you see that kind of alley here on that. And also, you might know the story that Jennie Wade was originally buried in the backyard. So on July 4th, after the battle, she's killed. They took her to the cellar. All July 3rd during the cellar. July 4th, they buried Jennie in the backyard. And then a year later, they rebury her in the German Reformed Church Cemetery, which was on Stratton Street, right here. This is where the alley is that goes in behind the GAR. I forget there's a name for that alley. I forget the name. But she's buried right there in behind that fence. And we have a couple pictures of the cemetery I didn't put in here. Do you know there's a house there right now? There's a house. It's the parsonage for the Trinity Church. If you happen to see the person who lives in the house, tell them their house is built on a cemetery. I always like people to know that, There are houses all over town built on top of cemeteries. Have they ever watched Poltergeist? Jennie Wade was eventually reburied in the Evergreen Cemetery when their family bought a plot there. James Wade had died. Off the top of my head, 1871, 1872, and his body was buried up in the cemetery, and then they moved Jennie's body there. And this is her original stone. Be ye ready, Jennie Wade. And it says she was killed. I think, does it say by a bullet? Does it say household duties? So I think local people push back against that. Oh, come on. Jennie Wade was accidentally killed. She wasn't baking bread for the soldiers, which I think is wrong. I think we got good evidence she was. But they changed it to household duties instead of baking bread for the soldiers. That way, she's baking bread, but it could be for anybody, right? Oh, I had a close-up of it too. Wow. So there's the original stone. So in 1901, a monument was placed on Jennie's grave. So they took the original stone away. And basically, Jennie Wade's sister, Georgia, had moved to Iowa. And she became very important in the woman's suffrage, the woman's temperance. What was it called? But anyway, she becomes very important in this organization. It helps Union veterans. And they want to put up a monument in Iowa to Georgia Wade McClellan. And Georgia says, how about if you put up a monument to my sister in Gettysburg? So this organization from Iowa comes to Gettysburg and puts up this monument to Jennie Wade to honor her sister, Georgia Wade McClellan. And she's very, very happy. I should say, look at the monument. You see the bottom of it? It says Jennie Wade, and there's nothing there. In 1910, I believe it was, 1910, Georgia has a flag placed on her sister's grave, and that flag flies today over the grave. When I was the president of Evergreen Cemetery, the state of Iowa sent us a flag every 6 months to replace the flag on Jennie Wade's grave. They stopped doing that. I guess it was a budget problem. So now Evergreen Cemetery replaces the flag every once in a while when it's worn. But in 1922, so yeah, you can go there and see the flag. Some people like to point out, and I'm probably responsible for starting this, that there's only 2 women in the entire United States that have flags that fly over their grave 24 hours a day without a light. And, of course, Jennie Wade and Betsy Ross. Without a light would be the key in that sentence. In 1922, Jennie Wade's sister had a plaque put on the bottom of the grave that says, Mary Virginia Wade. Isn't that fascinating? So, again, she realized that Jennie wasn't really her name. She wanted to show people her name, so she put it on there. Also in 1922, she put a plaque on the house where Jennie Wade was born and a plaque on the house where Jennie Wade lived in the town at the time of the battle. And so the Jennie Wade family, there's some really cool stuff that came from Jack Skelly's family. And here's a pass given to Daniel Skelly to recover Jack's body from Winchester in 1864. And today, Jack is buried in Evergreen Cemetery, not far from Jennie Wade. I'd say it's 75 yards from Jennie Wade to Jack Skelly's grave. You could measure it. I have not measured it. But there he is, buried in Evergreen Cemetery. Now, in 1901, Robert Miller buys or gets a hold of the Jennie Wade house. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Ina Gorlick had bought it with her husband, Jacob Kitzmiller. They had 2 daughters. One of those daughters marries Jacob Mumper, who has postcards and souvenirs. And then the other daughter marries Robert Miller, I believe. And he opens up the Jennie Wade House Museum. So the Jennie Wade House Museum opened up in 1901. It's very clear, May 1901. It is the oldest continuously operational museum in the town. Isn't that pretty impressive? It's been around since 1901. Of course, for most of its existence, it was a free museum. So here's a 1901 article that talks about the museum and how Robert Miller is giving tours of the museum and how it's filled with artifacts. And his brother-in-law, Jacob Mumper, really takes advantage of it and sells postcards and souvenirs out of it. So it's a gift shop, really, but you can come and learn the story. And over time, Robert Miller becomes like the foremost expert on the life and times of Jennie Wade. Now, again, here's another article from 1901 that talks about the house and it being a museum. And here we have a large collection of early postcards that feature the Jennie Wade house and Jennie Wade's picture and the monument over her grave. This would be after 1901, of course. Here is a 1904 postcard, rotograph out of New York City of the Jennie Wade house when it's a museum. Here's a 1910 postcard, I believe, and it shows the Jennie Wade house. Again, look at the sign on the fence. Can you see what it says? Free museum. And a lot of the early museums in Gettysburg, they were free. They're trying to get you inside the building so you can buy stuff from their gift shop. Isn't that a good idea? So, by the way, after the program here in a few minutes, you may go to the gift shop and buy something on your way out. And I should mention that we do have Jennie Wade's story by Cindy Small for sale in our bookstore. So, and Cindy is a very good friend of the Adams County Historical Society. She was just here. I just saw her last week. So buy her book if you have room on your bookshelf. Here's a 1903 Detroit News Company. See, they did actually move the free museum sign to the fence, but there's a good view of it. And I have this postcard of Jennie Wade. I bought it because I have no idea who produced it. And, I often thought, is this Jennie Wade or is this the singer Jennie Wade now? Do you know there's a singer about that time? When you Google it in the early 1900s, there's a opera singer named Jennie Wade. So this might not be our Jennie Wade. I always thought it was, so I bought it here. And then here is the Jennie Wade House pamphlet. That's awesome. I don't think I own one of those, but I think this is Eric Dorr. I got it out of his museum there. And then what happens, it's really fascinating for the story, a good thing for our story, is in 1913, during the 50th anniversary of the battle, Georgia Wade McClellan comes back to Gettysburg, and she stays on Baltimore Street with some friends, and every day, July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, 1913, she comes up to the Jennie Wade House and sits there and talks to all the veterans that come by and talks to anyone who wants to visit and tells how this was her house during the battle and her sister Jennie was killed there. It is a fabulous event, and I have lots of different veterans writing about meeting Georgia Wade McClellan. And out of the blue, this guy named John White Johnston comes there. He's visiting Gettysburg because he's interested in the 1913 reunion. And he comes there and he meets Georgia. And he decides to write a book about Jennie Wade. This image here I got from my friend Joe from his Gettysburg postcard site. And on the back, it says, July 2nd, 1913, this was taken. And I when the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, I think that right there is Georgia Wade McClellan. Look, this is the chair they probably put there for her to sit in. That's her. And look, here's some veterans that are visiting in the house, and she's getting her picture taken with him. It's taken the same day she's there. So on the back, it says the house in which Jennie Wade was killed. Now, John White Johnston starts to become very interested in Jennie Wade. And he purchased the house in which Jennie Wade was born. And there's an article in the paper where he's going to open up his own Jennie Wade Museum in competition with the Jennie Wade Museum. But he's going to tell the true story of Jennie Wade. Something bothered him about the way people are telling the story. And, here it is. Did I put it in here? Let's see. Yeah, this is in 1922 where they unveiled the plaque on the Wade house. So she comes here again, Georgia Wade McClellan, in 1922. And here is the 1917 book, The True Story of Jennie Wade, a Gettysburg maid. I don't know what he means by maid. Maiden? Short for... But we have in our collection like 5 copies of the original book. Now, Margaret. So this weird thing happens. And I'd love to search in the basement of the courthouse to see if they have the transcript of the trial. All I know is a little bit about the trial from the newspaper. And what happens is Georgia Wade had saved the dough tray that Jennie was using when she was making the bread. And when the Jennie Wade House Museum opened in 1901, she had it put on display at that museum. And then John White Johnston tells her, hey, I'm going to open up a Jennie Wade museum. Could we have the dough tray for display in our museum? And so Georgia goes. Now, again, I don't know what year it was she gave it to the museum, but Georgia goes to the museum. And she goes to get her dough tray back, and Miller says, I'm sorry you gave it to me. And so John White Johnston sues Miller in court for the ownership of the dough tray. So there's a court battle over the dough tray. And eventually, Miller is able to produce a note written by Georgia in which Georgia said, I give you the dough tray to be put on display. And then they argue about the meaning of the word give. And Miller won. And today the dough tray is still on display at the Jennie Wade House Museum, and the price of admission goes to pay for the care and maintenance of the velvet rope that keeps you away from the dough tray. Isn't that correct? So anyway, the dough tray causes such a stir nationally that, of course, the mumpers are going to take advantage of it. So they make replicas of the Jennie Wade dough tray. And Margaret has an exact replica of the dough tray, or did you hit it down there? Okay. And if you open it up and look underneath, it has, this is an exact replica of the dough tray used by Jennie Wade when she was killed during the battle. And the Jennie Wade dough tray is the best-selling relic in the history of Gettysburg relics. So let's do, who's got a phone? Who's good at using their phone? I want somebody to look on eBay now. Anybody have eBay on their phone? I know you could buy stuff on eBay. I want you to Google on eBay, as I probably not the right term to use, search for Jennie Wade dough tray. And I'll bet you right now there's 5 or 6 of them on sale on eBay. They range in price from $10 to $60. I've seen one. So don't pay too much for them. Okay? But you can get one. I'm sure you can get one for $10. Did you find any? You got one for $25? $25. Not too bad. But I would only buy them if it has the paper in it that says this is an exact replica, because you don't want to buy a forgery. And I have a couple that have the original price on them. They sold for 50 cents. Okay? So everybody looking? Good. How many? Oh, he's got one for $19.99. Okay. Buy one later. You don't have to admit it now. But should I tell him this, Margaret, or should I be embarrassed? I have the largest collection of Jennie Wade dough trays in existence. Okay, just here at the end, a few interesting things. So in 1964, they started charging admission to the Jennie Wade house. So before that, it was free. And then, of course, it was run by this organization, the Gettysburg Heritage Association, which eventually became the Gettysburg Tour Center. And they had this wax figure of Jennie Wade outside the house, and I remember it when I was a kid. And Joe, one of his friends, has a picture with the Jennie Wade wax figure. Look how realistic it is. And I'm sure that when I saw it, I'm going to guess 1970, face was melting in the hot sun. But they would bring it in and out. It was in the house and they'd bring it outside. Now, I think in 1988, they put a bronze statue of Jennie Wade in front of the house. But before that, it was a wax figure. Erica, did you ever see the wax figure? No, you gotta, it might, you know what? Ask Max. Maybe it's in storage in the basement. I don't know. Oh, yeah. Look at that. And then, of course, the Jennie Wade house is still open. You can see it today. Here's like a 1970s image of it. When I was a kid, and I noticed that in the Charlie Weaver presentation we did a few weeks ago, there was a little bit, Glenn did a little bit on this. Mark Nesbitt, who we know as the man who runs the ghost tours, he got a job working for the Jennie Wade house, and he put this figure in there. And so if you haven't seen this, it's kind of interesting. They projected a video onto the face of this mannequin, and it was Mark Nesbitt's face. And he told the story of Jennie Wade being killed. Anybody else remember this? Good. I'm sure Randy, you just don't want to admit it, right? But it's fascinating.